What's up folks, Will here with another video. Today we're going to take a look at how you can analyze messages that are being posted in Teams, but without ever leaving the tyGraph for Teams default layout. So when we say we're analyzing Teams messages for a certain keyword, I think it's first important to explain what we actually mean by a message. Sometimes I hear people use the term thread or post or message interchangeably, but at tyGraph they mean specific things. And so I'll just explain what they mean to us first, and so we can have a level set together as we begin this analysis. So a thread is the first block of text that initiates a conversation in a channel. A response is any text that's underneath that thread, and a message is any body of text at all, so that's the thread plus the responses that are underneath it. And we can actually see that in tyGraph for Teams itself. Now, as I promised though, we're not going to be making any edits today, especially for the tyGraph Online folks. So if you're interested in going to that level of detail, you can watch the advanced examples in the video that follows this one. I'll leave the link to that at the bottom of the article that matches this video and in this video's description. At this point, I think it also might be worth mentioning that if you prefer reading or want to skip to a certain question that I answer in this video, you can find a companion knowledge base article on our website, link also in the description. The article headers will have links to the timestamps for the video where I actually answer that section of the article. So you can just skip to the question that you have and click the link to the video, and it'll bounce you out and take you straight to that point. Now, moving on to searching by keywords for Teams. So the simplest form of keyword searches can be done with an attribute that's actually right in the filter pane. So sometimes when you come into the Power BI service, you'll see that the filters is hidden on the right-hand side here. You can just click and open that out. Now, if you cannot find the message attribute in the filter pane and you're in tyGraph Online, then please reach out to me or a colleague at your company, and we'll see if we can get you the permissions for a report that has that attribute exposed. However, if you're in the Power BI service, you will have the ability to draw it out, and we can do this very easily. If we go to the top and click the ellipsis, go to edit mode, we can actually pull it out of the message table. So if you open up the message table, you can grab message and add it out here. So that's got now message body enabled. Now for those of you who already do have it here, we're now all up to the same point. And to search for a certain keyword, all we do is go from basic to advanced filtering. And now we'll see that we have conditions where we can say, show us all messages that contain a certain keyword. So the example that I'll be using throughout today will be collaboration. So I can search collaboration and then click apply filter. And now that I've done that, we will now see only messages that have contained that certain keyword for the rest of this explanation. So the first and probably most common question we'll get as soon as someone has filtered down to the keyword that they want to analyze is, how is that keyword trending over time? And I think the simplest way to express this is using the messages and contributors visual. And the reason I like it so much is because we're simply plotting the number of messages that are being posted by a given time period that contain our keyword that we've chosen. And so it's a nice, simple way to display this. And as we can see here, we can see the highs and lows as far as when are the days that people are posting these messages inside Teams. And we can spot right away a big spike towards the end of our time period here. Now, it's important to know that you're not limited to this perspective either in the default reports. So if you want to change the aggregation that we use for the axis and how we are displaying this, you can. You're not held to this daily view. For example, if you're tracking a campaign or a keyword that has been very long running on the network, it might be handy to go, for example, to like a 180-day period. So if I bring this out, sometimes it gets more difficult to analyze how this is trending over the course of several months. And so what you can do is click the drill up arrow, and it'll change that aggregation or the axis that we're using to now show it to us on a monthly basis. Now, by the same token, another common question that we will get is there a peak time on the network when people are posting this? So are we capturing people outside of their normal work hours? Are people posting these messages as soon as they get in the morning? You can find that out also equally as quickly by clicking this double down arrow that we see here, and this takes us down to the next level in the hierarchy. So if I select that, now we can see that there's a clear peak at about 4 p.m. and another one at 8 p.m. Now this will depend a lot on the location of your users and the nature of your organization. And tyGraph, by default, we're going to display this in UTC so that it's nice and standard, regardless of if you're a global organization, everyone's seeing the report the same way. If you're not in the UK, though, you will be doing a little bit of math in your head, so just keep that in mind. And if I haven't mentioned it already, just if you're interested in more details about how we use these dynamic axes for date visuals, especially at tyGraph, I highly encourage that you go and check out our other article that focuses specifically on that topic. I'll include it in the description for this video, as well as in the article that coincides with this video. So the next question that we often get is, are more or less people engaging with that keyword? Now we kind of get an insight into this with the number of message contributors that we can see here. And what this is telling us is how many users have posted those messages. And in this example, we can see there's a lot of kind of one-to-one scenarios where there was 2 messages posted and 2 contributors. So obviously each of those messages was posted by a unique person. But we will see cases that message contributors is always a unique number. So if we go to our peak day here, we've got 10 messages that were posted, and they were posted by 8 people. So there must have been someone who posted more than once. So that's the first perspective that we get on how many users are engaging with this particular keyword, but it's kind of limited in scope, really, because we're only measuring people who have actually taken the time to post a message. And a lot of people want to know about perhaps other people that we're missing out in this. For example, someone could be participating in a subject just by reacting to those messages and not actually ever reply, but we still want to be able to count those users that we're reaching. So in order to do that, I like to use the engaged members gauge and the trend, as well as the engaged members percentage, which we can see when we hover over the gauge. And so to get us to a point where I can explain an engaged member a little better, I'm going to use the May-score metric filter here. But first, let's explain what an engaged member is, for those of you who may not already know. So an engaged member is any user, unique user, who has taken any one of these May-score metric acts of engagement for the report period. So we're saying that 49 people have either mentioned, messaged, or reacted to a conversation that contains this keyword from March the 2nd to March the 31st. And the reason that this understanding is important is because now I'm going to apply a bit of a filter and test our understanding of what I just defined. So if I unselect mentions and reactions, we're going to see something pretty neat happen here where we will get 40 people who are engaged. So that number is a little bit lower because we've kind of raised the bar as far as how we want to define someone who's engaged. But let's take a look at something neat here. So we talked a little bit earlier about how we had 8 message contributors in this bar. And if I select that, now we can see that these numbers actually match. So we've got 8 people who have posted a message and our 8 message contributors. So that's good. That's just so that we're starting on the same level set here. Now, if we go to the most recent data that we have, it's 5 and they match. Now let's start adding in people who have reacted to a conversation. Now we can see that number goes up to 6, where our message contributors before was just 5. And so I think that's a good way to show how when we begin to add May-score metrics, now we can understand that we're actually counting people who have reacted to that conversation, not just people who are posting them. And so the reason that this is so valuable is because it allows us now to be able to say, well, how many users at large, when I unselect that date point, are we engaging more people based on messages and reactions, not just how many people are posting it? And for this little demo company, the answer is no. We've actually had a decrease in the number of people who are talking or reacting to conversations that include the keyword collaboration in them. And so the insight that we can draw from that is that it may not be as popular, at least right now. And I'll just explain 2 other measures that we can see out in the open here. The 55 number that you see right here is the number of people who had either posted or reacted to that conversation in the previous period. So we're looking at a 30-day period, and 30 days prior to March the 2nd, is who we're including in this 55 count. And so in the current period, we're down to 49, and that's how we're arriving at this 10% decrease number. So the next question I'll cover is who has used this keyword the most? So for a simple list of users who have posted this message, we can flip over to the Teams and Channels page. I'll click that. And inside here, there's a team members chart. And the reason I like this one is, as the question asks, let's actually see those users listed out by the messages that they've posted. And because we have this message filter applied, we can see now all the number of messages that are being posted by each of those users that contain this keyword. So from here, commonly what an analyst will do is they will sort this to show us who is the user who's posted the most number of messages. But alternatively, you can do other things as well. You can see how many likes that they've given out on a particular conversation that contains this keyword. Or another popular one is how many likes are people receiving based on the messages that they've posted to do with a certain keyword. So you can go through any one of those permutations for messages likes or likes that they've received inside this chart, and I think it's very handy. From here, people will often also click on the ellipsis and export this data if you wanted to draw a list of who these exact users are. So don't forget that if you click on the ellipsis, you can also export this data. One other alternative is if we flip back to the recent activity page, you could also use the top influencers visual. I'm not going to go into too much detail about the team's influencer score, other than it's just our own algorithm for weighting things like how many likes or reactions rather you will get on your conversations in Teams, as well as how many people will reply to your conversations. So we put together this algorithm that will help you understand who are the most influential people around this topic. I'd say it's kind of a second step after you've known how many times certain users have posted that message, as we saw on the Teams and Channels page. So if you're just looking for that simple list of who's using those messages, that's the right place to go. But I think as a second option, it's also important to know that we also are ranking users by their influence about messages that contain the certain keyword. And so for those of you who are interested in that, I'd encourage you to check out this visual as well. Next, let's talk about where people are actually using this keyword. And the recent activity page also lends itself well to answering this question, because in the bottom right of the canvas, we can see teams by May score. We talked a little bit earlier about engaged members and what that means. Let's just cover off what the May score is, because it's actually used as a basis for how we're defining engaged members. So the team May score is a simple, non-weighted summation of the activities that we have selected in our May score metrics filter. So all we're saying is that there were 5 actions of engagement. They could be a mention, a message, or a reaction, and we're totaling that up for each of these teams. So this is extremely valuable and flexible, because now we're able to see is how many of those actions were taken on messages that contained our keyword. Next, we can even go to another level. So if you're interested in what the actual teams are that had the engagement, we can click the double down arrow here to go to the next level in the hierarchy, and instead we can analyze this on the basis of each of our channels. So you might have a team that might have a lot of conversations about this, but they're all concentrated within one channel, vice versa. You can flip between the hierarchy that's available here, and we can actually see it in the visualizations area here that coincides with this visual, what's going on. So if I click the drill down mode, we could even go to this top team here, and let's see, I don't know if all these, no. So the activity that's around our keyword is actually spread across 2 different channels within that team. It's not all within one, although most of it is within the methodologies channel. So you can use that drill down mode to quickly understand where exactly these conversations are going on and to see if they're popular within certain teams or channels. Next, I want to show you another way that we can visualize users who are at the center of this conversation. I mentioned earlier that some people will use the influencer score to understand who's really driving the conversation around this keyword within the organization. But a secondary question that can come up from this is, in some companies, you can even have situations of almost like a tribal mentality, or where there might be siloed groups of people where just because we have two users who are driving the conversation, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're talking to each other or that they're even in related work groups at all. And this can be very difficult to spot. We almost get a hint at it when we look at the teammate score, because there's a very decent spread of messages or actions that are occurring surrounding this keyword for a pretty low, I would say, number of messages that are being posted spread over time. And so the way that we can visualize who these people are and whether or not they're interacting with each other at all by going to the network interactions page. Now, inside here, we can see that there's a hidden networks visual. And the reason that the hidden networks visual got its name is because we often refer to this concept of the hidden org chart, which is that ultimately you can report to certain people within the company, but that the company's kind of true or hidden org chart will be revealed as users interact and talk with each other within tools like Teams, Yammer, or other enterprise social tools. And so we can see right now it doesn't really look like much, and so I prefer to bring this at a higher level if you can. You have to be careful. You don't want to cap out the amount of data that we put through this visual as well. But the value of this visual is that we can spot really kind of three different types of scenarios that could go on when it comes to conversations with our keyword in it. And the first person that you want to be able to spot is users that are really at the center of involving multiple users. And the reason they're easy to spot is because you'll see them at the hubs of sort of these wheels of discussion. So like we said earlier, we had someone who was pretty influential, but we can also spot people who might have ranked lower in their influencer score, but clearly are at the center of a lot of discussion, or they're at the center of a discussion with many different people regarding this particular keyword. And so those would be the first people that I would encourage you to take a look for. Second to that, often analysts will be looking for users that are connecting an otherwise separate tribe on this conversation. And so I would think a good example of this, we can see that there's sort of islands of users who are interacting with each other around this particular keyword. But there's a neat example over here where we might have an otherwise separate discussion, it looks like, with different users about this keyword, but you'll have users who will bridge that gap. Leland is a very good example in this case. And so in those sort of cases, folks will be interested in who those people are and what actual team that they're making that post in, as well as why it was that they were able to bridge across several people or involve people that might not otherwise have been involved in a conversation with people somewhere else in the company. Finally, this is also very valuable for spotting users, and particularly key users in the company who are on the fringes of a conversation. So we have cases where customers will be looking for executives that are taking part in this key discussion. Could be around collaboration or something else that's important in the company. But if you find that they're on the fringes of this discussion and you spot them on the outside of the dance floor, we could use the analogy for, then that can be a pretty bad thing, and you would want to be able to look for those users that are out here on the fringes. So you can even filter this further and highlight someone from the organization. I'm not going to get into that, but I think those are just three examples of how you can understand who's really at the center of these discussions, and sometimes even more importantly, who isn't. The final question that I'd like to answer today is for those of you who are looking to know if comments around a keyword are of a positive or negative sentiment. And so you might expect seeing that right next to the network interactions, we have the sentiment tracking page. Now, I am going to have to cheat a little bit because our demo data set doesn't have enough of a sample size to really be able to analyze this. And so you can see here that our key influencers visual doesn't find any visual, or any influencers rather. And so all this is saying is that it either couldn't find enough of a signal, or in some cases, we just don't have enough of a sample size here. We don't have enough messages to really allow this AI visual to work. So like I said, I'm going to cheat. And from this point forward, we're just going to remove our message search. I'm just going to reduce it down to like the single pronoun I, the letter, and that'll expand our sentiment tracking report enough that we'll have enough data that just contains the letter I in it. We have enough messages now that our AI visual will work. So the The first thing I want to explain is the team sentiment visual on the right. So this is an average of the sentiment score for every message broken down by each team and channel. Now, first off, if you're not aware, the sentiment score is a value from 0 to 1 that we assign to each message, where 0 is the most negative that a message could be, and 1 is the most positive, with 0.5 being neutral. In fact, neutral is actually a little broader than that. Often I would count it to be 0.4 all the way up to 0.6. So using this scale, we then average that across the different messages in these conversations, and now we can analyze how positive or negative in general conversations that contain our keyword are within these different teams and channels. Next, if you're looking to plot the average of your sentiment over time, you can see that along the bottom here with our sentiment by date. I think that's pretty self-explanatory, so I won't put too much detail into how you can analyze that. However, I do want to talk about this key influencers visual. It analyzes your data, ranks the factors that matter, and displays them as these key influencers. So the core of this visual, in my opinion, are really two plots. There's the key influencers and top segments. And you can actually hover over these and it'll give an explanation. I don't see it right now, so I'll switch to reading view. I'll save my change. There we go. When we're in reading view, you can actually see that when I hover over this dot, the visual actually literally spells it out for us. So it's saying that when a message contributor is this Dorella user, the average sentiment is 0.21 units higher compared to all other values. And you can tell how much of that is the proportion of the data. And that's a really big part in how Microsoft is ranking these influencers. So you might see, if we look at the chart just to the right of these key items, we can see that this Dorella user isn't actually one of the users with the highest sentiment. And so one might expect that Chilton here, who has a perfect sentiment, completely happy person, has influences sentiment to be higher. But as we know, a lot of this depends on the sample size. So we can see that there's only one count of messages being posted by these users. So it's not really that significant in the big picture. The neat part is if I tick this box to show values that are influencers, now it'll focus it down and show us just Dorella. I think it's comparing that user against perhaps maybe two other ones that are in this plot as well. And so this is very useful for us to understand that the reason that Dorella is having a large impact on sentiment being increasing, having a high likelihood of a positive conversation, is because they've posted 103 messages and they're consistently higher than the average. And so let's explain this number here. We can see that that dotted line is the average for our selection. And the neat part is that it actually matches the average for sentiment across here. So you'll see this number and this number will always match. Next, I think it's also worth explaining that it doesn't have to be a user. I've just happened to select a user off the bat because that was the top influencing factor. However, you can also have things such as certain team names, channel names, job titles, whether or not people are attaching items to their conversations, and it'll really help you understand what you can do to be able to make these conversations have positive outcomes. Okay, folks, so as you can see, you can draw a raft of rich insights around a keyword that's being used in Microsoft Teams without ever leaving the default layout for our tyGraph for Teams reports. So I'd encourage you to go and try some of the examples that we explored together here today. If you have questions about anything that you saw, as always, feel free to reach out to me in the tyGraph customer network external Yammer group, or there's also the support email, which I'll include as always at the bottom of the article that'll coincide with this video and in the description for this video down below. Thanks so much.